This video is a follow-on from the previous 13 videos dealing with price in the precious metals markets. If you haven't seen those videos, I'd recommend you doing so before watching this one. So let's pick up where we left off and look at inflation some more. In the previous video, we looked at the CPI, the narratives put out by the Fed, etc. In this video, I'm going to talk about interest rates as it relates to inflation, and I'm going to say what I believe their intentions are. Before we go any further, I want to say something about intentions. Talking about intentions is tricky. How can anyone know with certainty what anyone's true intentions are? I would say we cannot. Be that as it may, we can look at people's actions and use this as a fair proxy, a substitute of sorts. Actions are, I think, a reasonably good indicator of intentions. In our everyday lives, we oftentimes judge a person by their actions. We can consider how they operate in the world, and this should give us a fairly good guide as to what their intentions might be. On this basis, we can consider what the Fed has done, how they've operated in the past however many years, and this should tell us something about their intentions. There is a caveat here. What I say about their intentions amounts to conjecture. I cannot know for certain. I could, of course, be totally wrong. Their true intentions might well be entirely different to how I have portrayed them. Let's return to narratives again, but this time the interest rates narrative. In the latest series of interest rate rises by the Fed and other central banks is not going to do much to counter inflation as it is claimed. It's the wrong tool for the job. It's like using an axe when you should be using a saw. Both are cutting tools, but they are used for totally different tasks, and any tradesman will tell you how important it is to use the right tool for a particular job. Raising rates dampens down demand. That's what it's designed to do. Interest rates are one of the two principal levers central banks use to manage, I would say control, the economy. What is supposed to happen is that the Fed pulls the interest rates lever when their economy is overheating, and they push the lever in the opposite direction when the economy needs stimulating. In my opinion, central banks should not be in charge of interest rates. Market forces alone should determine interest rates. Indeed, there should be no central banks at all. They are the scourge of societies. The world would be a lot better off without them. But I don't want to go off in a rant about this, and besides, I've done lots of videos talking about how central banking is a complete con. Back to our present situation. So, the Fed and other central banks are doing what they can to dampen down demand. And this is a pretty important point. They're doing this into a weak economy, and that is most definitely not a good idea. To put this in plain terms, they are destroying demand and killing the real underlying economy, and they're doing it on purpose. It's all part of their grand plan. If you're not already aware, be advised that the plans of our overlords are to recreate a feudal system of a bygone age with two distinct groups, the lords and the serfs. So, a two-tier society with the haves and the have-nots. It will be a pure plutocracy, the rule of the rich. Just look at the latest Davos meeting to see our overlords in operation, flying in on their private jets. How nice. Back to the topic at hand, narratives. If the Fed was serious about tackling inflation, then it would raise interest rates to above the level of inflation and keep them there until inflation was under control. Back in the early 1980s, previous Fed Chairman Paul Volcker rose rates to 20% to tackle inflation. That's not going to happen now for various different reasons. But anyhow, if they raised rates to above the level of inflation and kept them there, then I'd be inclined to believe they were actually trying to tackle inflation. So again, this narrative about interest rates is just baloney, to use an American phrase. Also, and more importantly, as I've said in the previous video, if they really wanted to stop inflation, they should be focusing on the money supply. That's the main cause. Inflation is defined in classical economics as an increase in the money supply, although more correctly it should be referred to as currency creation, because the US dollar is a money substitute. It's a currency masquerading as money, but anyway. So, They should be doing whatever they can to suck currency out of the system in order to tackle inflation. Gregory Mannarino of Trader's Choice on YouTube says that all they would need to do would be to get high street banks to build up their reserve requirements. This would mean that the banks would have to hold more currency in their vaults, so to speak, thereby taking currency out of circulation, and I don't doubt him. There's obviously more to the situation than just interest rates and money supply. Levels of productivity in the economy are important also. Reinstituting a sound money system, i.e. returning to the gold standard, would also be a good move. I'll touch on this in a future video in this mini-series. Gregory Mannarino often says that the Fed is an inflation creation machine, and I would have to agree with him. So their focus on interest rates can be regarded as a kind of misdirection. Look over there, not over here kind of thing. They most certainly do not want the general public's attention focused on the money supply. That would give their game away. It's important to understand that it's unlikely that inflation will come down to what we could consider to be normal levels anytime soon. Indeed, I expect inflation to trend up this year, and then at some point inflation or superinflation will give rise to hyperinflation. The reason I've spent so much time talking about inflation in this mini-series is because it will have an impact on precious metals. We're not seeing much impact now because of the price suppression, as I've outlined in the third video of this mini-series. Be that as it may, anyone who's been on this planet for any length of time should know that nothing lasts forever. The suppression, the manipulation will come to an end at some point. Then precious metals will go to true market value. The price then should rise to many multiples higher than it is now. Although we have to be wary of valuing anything in terms of increasingly worthless currencies, the money substitutes. Currencies are the means by which we measure value or worth, but in an inflationary or hyperinflationary environments, this mechanism fails. The figures become absurd in a hyperinflationary environment to the point of being meaningless. In the future, we will probably be valuing products in terms of weights, so grams of gold or silver for a period of time. If you aren't already aware, we're in the midst of a currency crisis. Fiat currencies are failing. Currencies are crap and will soon shown to be so. To finish off, all these things, the value of precious metals, inflation, interest rates, are connected. All these various parts fit together much like the pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. To aid understanding, I've done my best to break down topics into smaller, more manageable parts, hence the many short videos. The pieces interlink to form a whole. The parts are presented piece by piece, and hopefully at the end you'll be able to put them together in your mind's eye and see the bigger picture. I split this topic into a number of videos, so there is another however many to follow. In the next video, I'll continue to talk about inflation with regard to the intentions of the Fed and other central banks, and I'll also talk about debt monetization and what this means for currencies, and in turn, what this means for precious metals. Wise up and rise up.